In section 2, we're going to look at other ways of solving quadratic equations other than factoring. And the idea here is the general form of a quadratic equation looks like this, where the number in front of the x squared is called a, the number in front of the x is called b, and the number before the equal sign is called c, and it's always equal to 0. Here are some examples. Can you identify what the a, b, and the c are in this problem? And this one, to identify the a, b, and c, you first have to rewrite it by moving everything over to the left. It's got to have equal 0. Here's one. The 4 needs to be moved over to the left. And there is no third component, so the c would be a 0 in this one. And another one, we need to move everything over to one side. The a, b, and the c are evident. Now this is one that we've already seen. To solve by doing the square root, you do the square root of both sides. Remember, when you do the square root of both sides, you have to put the plus and minus on there. I'll explain in class maybe why that's the case. Here's the two answers. Same thing we get if we factored it, which I did on the left. If we do that on this one, we move the 15 to the other side, add 15 to both sides, divide by 3, do the square root of both sides. Remember to put the plus and minus on. The two answers would be square root of 5 and negative square root of 5. Now this is one in the homework problems, and I'll let you go look it up. We won't spend time right now to work that. Here's completing the square. The only time that you would need to be able to do this is if you're going on to a higher level math class. All the quadratic equations that you'll be solving in college algebra, you can use the quadratic formula on, which we're getting to shortly. However, I want to show you this technique for those of you that might need it in the future. And this is where the quadratic formula comes from, as I'll show you in a minute. The technique goes like this. Here's a typical quadratic equation in standard form. If we move the 4 to the other side and make it negative, in the left hand side we're going to turn into a perfect square. That's why it's called completing the square. Down below we'll put parentheses with a square on it. And the steps go like this. If this is an x squared, this has to be an x. Whatever number is in front of the x in the middle term, we take half of that, we square it, and if we add 9 on the left side of an equation, we've got to add 9 on the right. And then we do like what we just did. Square root of both sides. Remember the plus and minus. And we get this. Add 3 to both sides. And there's the two answers. 3 plus square root of 5 and 3 minus the square root of 5. Like I say, don't get too fond of that technique, because unless you're going into calculus, you'll never see that again. Now here's where the quadratic formula comes from. And again, you don't need to know all of this as far as being able to reproduce it, but here's what it looks like. If you call the numbers a, b, and c, and again the kicker here is it has to be like this. A is the number on the front of the x squared, b is the number on the front of the x, and c is the number in front of the equals. And it says 0 on the right. If it's not like that, then what we're about to see does not even apply. And so if you divide through by a, move the c over a to the other side, do completing the square. This has to be an x. Half of b over a would be b over 2a. Square that, add it to the other side, and rewrite it. Do the square root of both sides, remembering the plus and minus. Square root of 4a squared would be 2a, but you can't do the square root of 4ac and b squared. So you just leave it like that, switch them around, and then subtract b over 2a from both sides. Put those together into one expression. This is the quadratic formula, which is on the formula sheet. You don't even need to memorize it. So here's how we would use that. If we've got a quadratic equation to solve, and it doesn't factor, or even if it did factor and you just partial to the quadratic formula, we could do this. Take out our formula sheet, look up the quadratic formula. The a is the number in front of the x squared, which is a 1. The b is the number in front of the x, which is negative 4. And the c is the number before the equals, which is a 5. Put all of those in their proper places, and then do the calculations in the proper order. First thing, the negative of a negative 4 is a positive 4. Inside the square root, negative 4 in parentheses squared is a positive 16. And then negative 4 times 1 times 5 is negative 20. Divide that by 2 and then simplify. 16 minus 20 would be negative 4. Now, we talked about this in chapter 1. The square root of negative 4 is called 2i, and that comes out on your calculator if you need help. And then divide through by 2, and there's our two answers. Here's the same thing again. And so that's using the quadratic formula.